Now we turn to number 8, covenant law, in our series on the promise God's everlasting covenant. Given material from Exodus, Isaiah, Hebrews, Deuteronomy and Amos, Genesis too. So a lot of material we could cover today, but I want to take you straight away to a thought from Joseph Prince. I put it there in the notes for this time, a quotation from him. God doesn't want us to have rigid rituals with him. In the new covenant, he is more interested in having a relationship with us. And I would like to suggest that that's what he was interested way back in the time of the Israelites too. Even though we're looking at covenant law, which is generally called the law of Moses, not that it was from Moses, it was God delivering it to Moses, who then gave it to the people, but very often referred to as the law of Moses. And then there's a quote from John Eldridge. Most Christians are still living with an Old Testament view of their heart. Jeremiah 17:9 says, "My heart is deceitfully wicked." No, it's not. Not after the work of Christ, because the promise of the new covenant is a new heart. It's an interesting perspective, isn't it? We all recognize our faults and our failings and our sinfulness, but we are on the way as God heals us and remakes us. So as we think about the covenant law, let's think about some of the reasons why God had to say it in the way that he did. If you've gone through the Pentateuch, those 5 books that were primarily written by Moses, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, sometimes you're going to be saying, my goodness, did God have to spell out all of this in this covenant law? These requirements, these demands even, which is the way that so often they are seen. And I think the Israelites saw them that way. These are the hard and fast requirements that God has demanded that we follow, that we obey. And frequently they say, yes, we've done everything that you've required us to do. Let's look at some of those Leviticus demands, if you want. You mustn't eat, and then here comes the list. An eagle, griffin vulture, bearded vulture, buzzard, kite and similar birds of prey, raven, crow, tawny owl, long-eared owl, gulls, any kind of hawk, little owl, fish owl, eagle owl, barn owl, desert owl, Egyptian vulture, storks, any kind of heron, hoopoe, bats, rats, mice, any kind of large lizard, gecko, monitor lizard, wall lizard, skinks, chameleon. Really? You have to spell all that out? Well, it's a bit like dealing with children. You know, when you say, you mustn't do this, and they say, well, what about that? Is that? No, you can't do that either. Well, what about this? Maybe I could do that. No, you can't. They want to explore all the permutations and combinations. It's a bit like all those lizards we just mentioned. Why didn't God say, don't eat any lizards? Because somebody's going to come along and say, well, what about big lizards? What about small lizards? What about geckos, the ones that run around on the walls of our house? What about those big monitor lizards? Did you mean those as well? What about lizards on the wall? What about skinks? What about chameleons? Do we have to avoid all of them? And God has to spell each one out, because that's the kind of people he's dealing with. Always looking for some kind of option, do you see? So God has to be explicit and name every lizard, every owl, every hawk, every vulture. And really, would you want to eat any of those? Sounds quite disgusting to me, but clearly he gave those laws to help them because they might be doing that. You know, when I was studying history, doing my degree, I was interested in what laws were being passed by Parliament, because as you looked at those laws, you don't pass a law for something that isn't happening. So looking at those laws told you what was going on in society, or what some people were doing. So same here. God is saying, okay, I'm going to be really explicit here. And the tragedy is that that's all they saw, instead of saying, thank you, Lord, for helping us to live healthier, better, good lives so that we can come into a better relationship with you. That is what God really wanted, as we saw there in the beginning.